experience, you hear a voice that is at the opposite extreme. And friends of his, him, that indeed they regard him in the same way that I had regarded him. And so there was this kind of polar element. And what we're really coming together today is to learn about Ben's approach to these situations and perhaps how it was different than we might have expected. What were the secrets, and that's the title of his book there, of the cancer slayer, and probe a little deeper in terms of the emotional, spiritual, personal aspects of it. So I'm going to ask some questions, and then, if you wouldn't mind, then we'll take your questions rather than trying to go back and forth, if that's okay. Okay? So, just to recap, 16 years old. Ben is athletic. He's playing on the tennis team. His hip hurts. He's going to work it out. He's tough. It'll get better. Fine. But eventually, it's not getting better, and gets examined, and he can come back to this, and he is told that he has a very malignant cancer called Ewing sarcoma, which he shared Friday night. Only 250, mostly young people, get this in the United States per year. He subsequently has chemotherapy, surgery, more chemotherapy. I visited him in NIH during all this time, or much of the time, so I remember him and all the tubes and the setting. And then he recovers. He returns to the University of Virginia. Life is good. He's overcome this obstacle, hardship, and on a subsequent blood test almost 3 years later, he is feeling fine, but the blood test reveals his bone marrow is shot from all the toxicity of the cancer-related treatments. So now he's told he's got a 30% chance of surviving. And he has to once again return to, I think, what he would regard as his Superman persona. And he's able to triumph over it again after getting a stem cell transplant from a young woman, right?
An umbilical cord.
An umbilical cord transplant. So that's the basic outline. First question, Ben. Did you ever say why me originally when you were diagnosed with a Ewing sarcoma?
It's a deeper question than how do you spell your last name, which is what I expected. No, I didn't. I didn't ask why me. I didn't think those kind of questions were useful. I knew that disease just happens, and I saw myself as one of the unlucky ones who got a deadly illness.
So you saw yourself as unlucky, but you didn't then think, why was I unlucky? You just said, I'm unlucky, basically.
Basically, at first I wondered if I caused it by eating too much fast food, which I had only been eating for about a year since I got my driver's license. Before that, my parents basically wouldn't let me eat that kind of crap. So I asked, did McDonald's cause my cancer? And when they said no, then I just moved on from there.
Okay. And I recall you're saying, or you're writing that when you received the diagnosis and you were talking to your parents, you didn't cry, but then the next day you cried, and then you didn't cry anymore after that, basically. So what was going on? What was going on there in your mind?
When my mom told me at the kitchen table that I had a tumor, I rushed out of the room, ran downstairs thinking I was going to cry. It seems like the natural thing to do based on movies and TV shows and popular media. People cry. That seemed normal, even though I couldn't remember the last time I had cried at that point. And I didn't. I did cry the next day. I was in the computer room at our house, and I felt awkward. Been so long since I cried, like the snot coming out and the weird noises, the head jerking. This was all very new to me. So I abruptly stopped, and I vowed never to cry again. I thought this very unethical thought, but it worked for me. I thought sick kids would need to cry. I'm not crying, therefore I'm not a sick kid, therefore I'm better than them. It was the wrong way to look at it, but at the same time, this was my survival technique. And I stuck to that vow for something like 11 years.
So again, I think this is kind of one of the first instances where I would think we would feel we have a departure from a certain expectation. I might say, if I knew you as a family or as a counselor, I might say, Ben, it's okay to cry. It's good for you. It'll in some way it'll make you feel better. And yet you already had a whole nother orientation toward that, which you didn't know. It might not have made any difference, but that's just the way, the playing field you wanted to establish for yourself, right?
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. I think in that moment, that's when I created that delusion that I was superhuman, or maybe it's not a delusion, but I created the idea that I was superhuman, and it started that day in the computer room, because everything thereafter, when I would stick to that rule, not crying, and when I performed other behavior that was not normal, that the other people going through
So give us
cancer-
some examples of that other behavior that you now know isn't normal. At that time, you probably thought it wasn't, but you're just beginning. But
Yeah.
what's a not normal Ben Rubenstein behavior regarding his cancer?
Never complaining about cancer, never saying the word cancer even. Never asking why me or questions like that. Never crying, never complaining, not showing pain or fear, not questioning my superiority, and not getting sad or jealous. These were kind of rules that I lived by that guided me and made me different than everyone else. And then that fueled me even more. It boosted my ego to continue living that way.
So if I had said to you, Ben, and let's say it wasn't true, a hypothetical. You're a young man. You've got this cancer. It's a deadly cancer. You're going to face this treatment. Would you, in your mind, have felt that you could have addressed that challenge in the way you did, or was it something about actually being diagnosed that you drew on this Superman persona, and you recognized that you had this fight in you?
I think that's it. I never felt superhuman or invincible before cancer, and it's crazy to think that having a deadly illness, I mean, that's very vulnerable to be one out of millions of people to have this rare deadly illness. But that's what triggered in me the feeling that I was invincible.
Now, during treatment, read that you didn't want to get too close to the other cancer patients. Why was that?
Yeah, I definitely pushed the cancer community away. I pushed away all the other patients. I didn't get close to my doctors and nurses.
Well, you wanted to get close to some of the nurses.
Some of the pretty nurses, yeah. But I thought that I was better than them, and I didn't want to dwell on cancer at all. I just saw it as this little roadblock that would consume a year of my life and steal my hip and deplete my energy and all that stuff. But other than that, it was just something I did, like brushing my teeth. I just did it. And then you finish brushing your teeth and you go on about your day. That's how I looked at cancer. And
so even though you had cancer, you didn't want to be with other people who necessarily had the cancer. You didn't want to have support groups with them or identify with, I know what you're going through. You were like, I've got cancer, but I don't have cancer the way you got cancer. Is that fair?
That is fair, and I didn't know what they were going through. I dealt with cancer differently than anyone I ever saw deal with it. And as I mentioned, when I cried, I looked at the people who cried and I considered myself better than them. And that continued through treatment. I looked at all the other patients and I thought that I was literally better than them. Like they were
weak?
They were weak, yeah, and I was superhuman. And I didn't want to be with them.
So there was a certain arrogance that, we have a negative connotation, but here it was an arrogance of survival, which is, again, I think a departure, no?
Yeah, I mean, it's not exactly the person that I was before and maybe the person I am now.
Did anybody call you on that? Like, who do you think you are?
No, the other patients, I wasn't a jerk to anybody. And the other patients saw what I saw in myself, which fueled my ego even more. One guy gave me, as a gift, when he finished treatment, he gave me a Superman shirt. He thought that we could all benefit from that mindset, and he saw that mindset in me.
And did you ever doubt your superhuman? Did you ever think that maybe this has been a mistake, that I've been holding the shield out too strong and to protect my vulnerabilities or perceived vulnerabilities when, maybe this isn't the right thing? I mean, did you ever doubt it?
There was one single time when I doubted it, and I'm going to jump ahead a bit of time. I was diagnosed when I was 16 with my first cancer. So we're jumping ahead 3 whole years to after my bone marrow transplant. It's about 4 months after my transplant, maybe 5 months. And I weigh 98 pounds. I'm undernourished. I can't eat anything. I'm drinking these boost shakes just to consume even 1,300 calories a day. I can't keep anything down. And I kind of see myself just falling apart. I can look at myself in the mirror and it doesn't look like me anymore. And at that moment, that was the only time when I questioned my superiority and considered that maybe I'm not superhuman. Because if I was superhuman, how could I look like this? How could this happen to me? I'm better than everyone else. Why is this happening to me and not happening to them? Fortunately, that feeling lasted a brief moment. I was put on a drug called prednisone, which is a steroid, and I got all better within the span of a few days, basically. So, didn't last long.
So it was a chink in the armor that was quickly filled up. How, in terms of cancer treatment and approach, is there much talk among professionals about the need for people to envision a persona, to wear a certain, try to wear a certain identity to get through it? Not to say Superman, but maybe the comic, uh, the the warrior. I'm just curious. Is there much in the literature about that, or I don't know.
There may be. I'm not sure. What I know is that there is some research that sort of suspending your belief can have positive benefits. And if you look at kids with cancer, often they look at themselves as Batman or Superman or some kind of superhero. You may have heard the story of Bat Kid. He was the little boy in San Francisco where they did this huge citywide thing for him. And even comic books. I think we all see movies like Iron Man, and we suspend our belief momentarily for those 2 hours, and we relate to those characters because maybe we want to feel like that. We want to feel superhuman. And we wonder what it's like to feel that way.
And are you convinced that if you hadn't donned this persona, it would have made the difference?
I'm not convinced. I have no idea what kind of benefit that had for me. What I know is that I would never go back in time and change it. I would never change my view of others, however unethical it was, however much it stymied my maturity, which I think it did.
And why is that? How is that?
I think it led me to be stuck at 16 years old for, I don't know, maybe until now even. I'm kind of stuck. Sometimes I felt that way.
But are you stuck because of the Superman persona stuck? That
It could be part of it. It could be just cancer itself. It could be a similar mindset to professional athletes who retire. You may recall, Brett Favre retired and unretired 5 or 6 times. He was a top quarterback. And I think it's because he looks at himself at his peak as a great quarterback, and he realizes that nothing he ever does will compare. So he wants to retain that feeling that he was so great. And so I look at my battles with cancer, and at the time I saw myself as the greatest cancer patient in the world. I thought I was superhuman, and there's power to that. So I look at that, and I look at a normal life, and sometimes you miss that sense of power, even if it is while going through something so horrific. And it can lead to a feeling of being stuck in the past, just like Brett Favre.
Interesting. Okay. What in this experience, I know it's a few years removed, what did you find as you were going through it most surprising, either about yourself or about the medical community or other patients, the culture? Just were there any things that kind of, God, I didn't think it was going to be like that, and it was something?
I think there are a lot of positives to how I saw cancer in specific ways. To answer your question, I never thought that washing my car would feel like such an accomplishment. I never thought eating a milkshake would be so joyful. It's the small things like that, going out to dinner, going to see a movie. These were cool things before cancer, but during cancer, they were epic. So it gave me an appreciation for these small things in life that we don't always have.
And I think you've suggested that you'll almost kind of miss those moments.
I miss the sensation, that childlike joy for these small things that it's easy to take for granted. And I try to retain that feeling. I try to remember what it's like to be so sick and to be filled with illness, and for those moments to be so powerful. Because I want to remember that, and I want to feel that over and over again every time I see a movie. But it's hard, memories fade, feelings fade, life goes on. That's kind of the way humans maintain their productivity. Because if we were always stuck in the past, always stuck at this single happy moment, then I don't know if we would get any work done. We would just walk around with a huge smile on our face and be unproductive.
Anything else as you look back, was a surprise?
There were a lot of surprises. I was surprised how people treated me differently sometimes. I had friends who didn't know how to talk about it, so they just distanced themselves. I was surprised my parents didn't see that I was superhuman. I thought they would look at me the same way as I saw myself.
How did you know that they didn't see you as superhuman?
They treated me differently, not the way my friends did, but they treated me with extra care, extra love, and I just wanted to be treated the same way.
Anything disturbing about your experience that, you're kind of in the wake of it, kind of left you or has left you wondering or upset?
Probably. I can't produce children on my own. My kids are waiting for me in a sperm bank in Fairfax County, Virginia. So I'm sure that bothered me at some point. I could never run or jump again. I had to quit my ambitions of playing professional football. It was a joke. I was pretty small as a kid. But, shorter running backs did make a comeback. So that angered me when I finally realized I would never run or jump again. In terms of, deep-seated anger towards cancer, I don't feel that the same way a lot of others do. I think that's because of how fortunate I am. I'm almost 13 years cancer-free from my second cancer. So I've been fortunate to be really healthy for a while now, and I see my friends who, some have passed away, some are going through a terrible bout of cancer, and obviously they don't see it the same way.
So you have friends who have cancer, and you said obviously they don't see it the same way. Do you try to impart anything to them, or how does that work? I mean, I know everybody's different. I get that, but here you've had this experience. They remember when you had it. Now they've got a cancer, maybe very deadly, and how is your relationship?
I think what I've found a couple things in life. When women have a problem, I basically just say, I'm sorry to hear that, what can I do? Instead of telling them what they should do. Because women baffle me. I don't know how women think. They're like, they rule the world in ways I don't even understand.
No, but in terms of other cancer kids, people.
Yeah, so a lot of my friends who have cancer are women.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And, I think it's an age thing. Younger male patients look to my story and they wanted to be me. But once you get past the late teens or early 20s, and when they're no longer male patients, they just don't relate to it the same way. So I don't tell people how to fight cancer. I think I used to. I used to think that my way was the only way. But then I realized that my way was my way, and that everyone needs to find their way, which is going to be completely different.
But you do have a book, Secrets of a Cancer Slayer, so you are telling them your way.
That is my way. I'm not telling you to go my way, to take that route.
Okay. So what are some of those secrets?
Basically,
No, you're supposed to say they have to read the book. They have to buy the book.
You have to buy the book.
Don't miss your cue. Yeah. No, what are some of them?
The rules that we discussed earlier. Don't complain about anything in life.
But especially if you're Jewish, I mean, kvetching is, that's, how can I not kvetch?
I know, and I don't eat hummus. I don't eat gefilte fish, so I'm an anomaly here.
Okay, well. Okay.
I don't eat bread.
Any
Yeah.
other secrets?
I fail at all Jewish dinners. It's an attitude. I think attitude is a huge part of it. There is some research, I'm not going to cite it because I don't know the exact facts and I don't know if the research is totally accurate. But I think attitude has an effect on our lives. Some people are more prone to certain attitudes than others. I think there are ways to tweak it. Follow some life hacks to tweak your perspective on life. But all of my rules, they created this mindset and this attitude I had towards my cancer and towards life. And that was my survival technique. It worked for me, and that outlook has worked for me as I try to be a normal adult post-cancer. I realize I'm still kind of stuck in the past, and I have these challenges as a young adult with the health baggage that I had. But regardless, I maintain a positive outlook.
And by the way, tell them where you're working.
I work for the agency that gives out the green cards, Citizenship and Immigration Services.
Which is part of Department of Homeland Security.
Yeah. And I also, these are jobs that just don't pay much money, and I speak as a job that doesn't pay much money. So I do a lot of things, only one really pays money, and that's federal employment.
All right. You mentioned, or we talked about the fact that cancer research, that your treatment is still basically the same as today as it would have been if you had Ewing sarcoma today. They might have maybe refined it, but the basic medical approach would be the same. But that yet other cancers are much more research funded. Why is that, and how is that?
It's based on money. So breast cancer is the most prevalent cancer in the country, besides maybe prostate cancer, but prostate cancer has a far lower mortality rate than breast cancer. So tons of money goes to breast cancer, and I am all for this, actually. If we could figure out a way to cure our worst cancer, then I think that would have benefits for all these other cancers. But childhood cancer, there's not much money there because there aren't that many kids, relatively speaking, who get cancer. Under 100,000 kids a year in this country get cancer versus 1.5 million adults, something like that. 3 million adults. I can't even remember. Huge amount. So the funding for new treatment for childhood cancer is not there. So we're still using the same drugs from like the 1970s, which actually happen to be pretty effective. If you look at leukemia rates in children, the cure rate for the most common type of leukemia is now, I think, 90%, something like that. It's very high. What they do know is that over time, the drugs and the radiation itself may not change, but they're seeing that varying the protocols has benefits. For example, I received a drug called adriamycin. If anyone has ever had this drug, you remember it because it's the red chemotherapy drug. It goes in red and it goes out kind of orangish, kind of weird. But adriamycin has a lifetime maximum dose. So in your life, if you get adriamycin, you can never get more than 350 milliliters per unit of blood for your whole life, no matter what illness you get in the future. 15 years ago, when I was getting adriamycin, the threshold was 450 milliliters. So I was getting a higher dose than they allow anybody to receive now. And what they find is that it causes cardiotoxicity, which is basically heart disease that could lead to cardiac arrest. So of all of the things I have to look out for, that's actually the main one. I have to get an echocardiogram of my heart every year to see how that's holding up. And we pay attention to that more than another cancer, actually, because I'm past that point where they consider a recurrence likely. So I exercise and I eat well, try to stay strong and keep my heart strong.
I want to just parenthetically, I shared this with Ben yesterday. I have a childhood friend who is a physician and is a epidemiologist and does a lot of surveys and quality of life. And he's very recognized in his field. And I recall when I was going to rabbinic school, or maybe I was just out of rabbinic school and he was doing studies, and we were talking about this question of funding and research. And he said, I'm going to be the guy who's going to testify before Congress, and I'm going to say that, to spend $175 million on research on this particular disease that it only affects like 4 or 5 people, it's really not worth it. And so I said, well, as a rabbi, I'm going to get up and say, every life is worth saving. How can you tell a family that maybe might be saved by this research? And so he looks at me and he said, yeah, so it'll be a little speed bump. So it's just kind of he was like Mr. Realistic at the same. Then much later, I saw my physician here, and my lab reports came back with a standard test for kidney function that now is at the upper range of normal. Upper range. And my doctor's, she wasn't thinking cancer, I don't know, but she's, So she had me have an ultrasound. And that's what revealed my tumor in my kidney. When I told this to my friend, subsequently, he says, I would never have given you that ultrasound. Basically, that level would have to have been much higher. And so, he's like saving money. And I'm saying, well, I am certainly glad that my doctor asked for that test. So these kind of questions in medicine are certainly being asked. How is your perspective, if changed, now 13 years removed?
I mentioned that those feelings and your perspective and memories, they fade. And I think they fade because we can't just stay, I don't want to say we can't stay super happy. I'm a happy person most of the time. But living on that cloud 9 where everything is amazing, I think maybe that reduces some aspect of being human. I'm not really sure. It is hard this long after to maintain the perspective never to complain about anything, especially when I'm surrounded by coworkers who complain about everything. So I try to do it. Every morning I wake up and I look in the mirror and I say the Shema.
Oh.
And when I say the Shema, I look at this tattoo. It's taboo, I know, but I have a tattoo right here. And there's a good story about this tattoo. 2 days before I started chemotherapy when I was 16 years old, I'm in my school library. It's journalism class. I'm supposed to be writing a paper, totally wasting time on Microsoft Paint. I'm drawing a picture of my perception of my tumor. This is how I envisioned my tumor 2 days before chemotherapy began. And I knew the tumor was a physical object. It was a mass. I knew that under the microscope it had blue dots. I guess because of the dye they use to see it. So I drew this picture of this ugly blob with spiky hair and blue dots, and it had this terrified expression on its face because it was looking up at these 2 nuclear missiles coming at it, one from the US and one from Israel, because I was about to annihilate it. I printed it, I put it on my refrigerator, and I looked at it from time to time over the course of the year. Treatment lasted a year. And when I was done, I reached that milestone, that single moment I was always waiting for. the conclusion of treatment, which ended it for me. At that point, I was no longer filled with cancer, and I was normal in my head at that single moment when I finished treatment. So I crumpled it up, I threw it away. But years later, I started thinking about that image and how awesome it was that at 16, that's how I viewed a deadly illness, that I would just annihilate it. And also, I never wanted to forget where I came from. You know, in the midst of my complaining coworkers, I wanted something to hold on to. So I drew my recollection of this tumor perspective, and I worked with a tattoo artist who made it much better and much scarier looking, because I told him I don't want to scare away women. I want it to be kind of cute and kind of weird at the same time. So he helped me out, and he tattooed it on me, and every day I look at it and it reminds me a little bit.
Do you want to show some of the women here to see if they,
My shirt's tucked in, so not now.
But we can't find it on your website, can we?
You can. If you go to my website, cancerslayerblog.com, just scroll down on the right side and you can see a picture of it.
And you can also see an X-ray skeletal image of Ben as he is now. So
yeah, you can see a CT scan of my skeleton, which I think is the coolest picture I've ever seen, because you see a normal hip on the right, and then you see on the left, nothing. It's like a free-floating leg. My leg is just there. It's higher than the other leg, but it's just bumping into nothing. In reality, it's scar tissue that it's mostly hitting, because my bone was removed. That whole bone, you can feel it, that wraps around your body. That whole bone was taken out and replaced with nothing.
Again, I'm still shocked that this shy little boy is just now so self-revealing and putting himself out there. That must have surprised yourself when you started doing this in relation to who you were. I have to believe that.
It does. I remember my first speech after my book published. It was at my synagogue where Rabbi Katz used to be the rabbi in Woodbridge, Virginia. And I had this printout of my speech, and I was basically shaking with nervousness. I hated public speaking, but my publisher said, hey, when you write a book, you have to talk about it. So I was so determined to help my book succeed any way I could that I got out there all the time to speak, and I joined a speaking organization. And yeah, I'm happy to say.
Well, you might have been scared to speak, but you weren't scared to say exactly what was on your mind in that book.
Well, okay, so writing a book in secret on my own is different than sharing a story in front of.
Okay, but then you open that book to people to read it. I mean, you're laying yourself out there. So I was like, wow. Well, I think another way that perhaps you've changed in perspective is something that you've written. At the time that you were being treated, I hated receiving the get well cards. I didn't need or want the pity, support, or wherever it is that compels people to send those kinds of cards. I usually stuck them in my desk drawer, you didn't throw them away, without reading them. I appreciated that people care, but I didn't want them to think about me. Why aren't they thinking about my brother? What's the difference between us? Nobody meant to upset me. They just didn't know what else to do. I guess if they knew I was Superman, then they wouldn't have thought the cards were necessary. So that kind of played into your mindset. Well, maybe I'm getting soft in my old age, but when I looked through the cards a few weeks ago, they meant something to me. All those people cared enough to send their thoughts and wishes, and in the case of some people, like my math teacher, a dozen or so times. My mom's friend who volunteered at the White House sent a card signed by the president. It was automated, of course, and President Clinton probably wasn't even aware of it, but it's still pretty cool. My older relatives sent what few thoughts they could muster. My young cousins even sent me some of their artwork. So you had a little bit of a change of perspective. But that's after you made it. You didn't have to be Superman now.
Yeah, I wrote that maybe when I was 24 24-ish.
So it's just so interesting. You're vulnerable. You're getting this treatment. I want all the love I can get, all the support, and no, I'm building a fortress right around myself. Nobody's getting in. So a very different approach. Just a couple more things, and then we'll open it up to more questions. Just as my supreme ability to fight cancer fueled my Superman complex further fueled my belief that I was invincible in every way. Looking back, I don't think it's possible to leave cancer the way I attempted to. Those experiences and memories, both positive and negative, will always be with me. They help shape the person I've become, which I think you've already kind of shared. A couple more. Okay. Was I nuts? I assume to have this persona, this approach? Yes, but I'm as proud of that 19-year-old Ben as any other. I challenge myself and anyone else to manipulate such horrible news, to turn it in a way. I doubt I could duplicate that now. Why couldn't you duplicate that now if you got some horrible news?
Let's start with the context of that. I felt that way after I had a biopsy that determined I had this second cancer caused by the treatment for the first cancer. The second one is called myelodysplasia. It's a cancer of the bone marrow. And I thought that after the doctor told me that I had a 30% chance of survival, which is pretty low. You don't normally hear 30% in terms of cancer diagnosis. And I thought, 30%, a lot of people might feel bad about that, but I was thinking, well, if 3 out of 10 survive, I'm Superman. Of course I'm one of them. He would have to say 0%, and even then I might have thought, well, he's just full of it. I don't know if I could duplicate it now. I can't say one way or the other, but for a while in my college years and soon after, this was a fear of mine that somehow I had lost that spark that made me unique, or that made me who I am, that somehow if it happened again, I would not be able to deal with it like Superman, like I had. And those were some of the deep questions I asked myself throughout college. I think I'm too busy nowadays to ask myself questions like that. But I don't know the answer. And to be honest, I hope I never know the answer, because I don't want to get cancer. But you did
duplicate
again.
It when you got the second cancer diagnosis. You jumped back into it.
Well, that was during the second cancer diagnosis when I thought that.
By the way, when he got the second cancer diagnosis, the 30% chance, he writes, "My brother and I discussed what the doctor said, the 30%. Many elderly people develop this disease. So we bumped my survival chance up to 50%. And since I was Superman, that number jumped to 80%. And an 80% chance of survival for a normal person meant an almost 100% chance for me." Well, I would have thought, well, you've already included that in the Superman thing, but that's okay.
It's new mathematics.
Yeah, in a flash, my 30% chance of survival became nearly 100%. Call me ludicrous, idiotic, or even psychotic if you'd like, but I didn't feel that statistics applied to me, as long as my chance of survival was more than 0%. In my mind, I was going to live. And by the way, here he is. He's in his cancer section of the hospital, and you're playing a lot of video games, and I assume they were like violent video games, and he's just
Grand Theft Auto.
what? Yeah, auto theft, Grand Theft Auto, And he's even using that. I think gotcha, kind of in the same way he's going to get the cancer. I didn't use the term Superman as a joke or to brag or to describe my strength. It was my strengths that led me to believe I was Superman, because there was no other term worthy. I used it to describe what was extraordinary about me, the Superman Ben, or maybe the inhuman Ben. Unlike my cancer-ridden left ilium, Superman was my one thing that couldn't be taken away. And the last thing I wanted to mention here before we open it up. In my final year at the University of Virginia, I took problems of personal adjustment, a supposed gut class. What does that mean?
Like easy A.
Oh, that's a gut class? Is an easy A?
I think so.
Really? Okay. I had to get counseling for my class project, and that's how I justified it. So you wanted to get the counseling?
I think at a subconscious level, probably. But I needed something that forced me to get counseling, or else I never would have done it.
Okay, so it was this easy A, but there was more to it than that. Okay. I had to get this counseling for my class project. That's how I justified it. Otherwise, I'd be admitting that I was a pussy, one of those people who can't deal with cancer. Well, I don't understand that, in that the fact that you were able to deal with cancer was because you hadn't done this type of thing before. So how am I getting that wrong?
What I was saying is that the type of person that goes to seek counseling was not the type of person that feels superhuman and beats cancer superhumanly. So I couldn't allow myself to be that person who got counseling. The only way I allowed myself to do it was because it was a school project, and I justified it that way.
Okay. Before seeing my counselor, I would have rather been forced to sit through a Barbra Streisand concert. Okay. My counselor thinks I went numb. Dealing with cancer can be so overwhelming that we turn off emotions until we get through it. But it doesn't seem to be working anymore, does it? She said that to you. Is that true? It didn't seem to be working anymore?
Hard to say. I think at that time I had lost some of the sort of the joy that I had felt during cancer with those little things. And maybe that brought me down a level as a whole. I wasn't feeling as upbeat as I wanted to and had been accustomed to.
Okay, she challenged me with questions, and I was learning more of me that I didn't know was there. Even when my class requirement was met, I kept coming. If you were forced to send your mother a message, what would it say? She asked. And you responded, she'll figure it out when the book comes out. But your counselor didn't let you off the hook, so I thought about it more. I guess I'd want to thank her. She made me think about sadness. She said that by not experiencing sadness, I was depriving myself of a part of life. I sometimes experience sadness, I pleaded, before realizing she was referring to crying. And you mentioned about how you hadn't cried since September 2000, something that she was both fascinated and concerned by. So she pushed me until I understood my aversion. The not crying had been one of my defining moments when I thought I was somehow special, not just unique in my ability to deal with cancer, but as if there was something in me nobody else on earth had. After that one cry, Superman was born. All right. So I want to really thank Ben, because, like I said, he didn't know the questions I was going to ask, and it's a very sensitive topic. So I really appreciate your letting me question you like this. Do you have any questions or thoughts, Joan? Okay.
32.
him, knowing what Ben went through, did it help me when I was? No, because I feel like we are on the opposite ends of the cancer spectrum. When I first got my diagnosis, I can imagine I felt like, well, maybe not Ben. I wasn't thinking that I was Superman, but I was thinking, oh my gosh, is my life over, because I didn't know what it was. And then as I learned a little bit more about it, potentially treatable, and you could have surgery, and that I wasn't going to have to go through cancer and radiation treatment. So to me, it was like apples and oranges. So I can't say yes to something that didn't seem to apply. Yes, Ruth. Well, I think you might mention that the chemo, the treatments for the second cancer was worse than the first, right?
Yeah, so for the first cancer, I got 14 cycles. It lasted about a year. Pretty intensive treatment, lose all your hair, including your nose hairs, vomiting a lot, that sort of thing. For the second cancer, I only got 1 week of treatment, but my doctor said it was literally 10 times more potent than my previous treatment.
That was designed to wipe out his whole system in his bone marrow, so a new bone marrow could come. So that was really to kill you off.
Yeah, there's a book called The Emperor of All Maladies. I think it won a Pulitzer Prize. And he talks about the biography of cancer and the treatment and how it's shaped over time. And the bone marrow transplant came about as a way to bring the patient, this is what he said, to bring the patient to the brink of death and hope they don't push the patient over. So the transplant is designed to kill you without killing you and then bring you back to life with the new stem cells. So that 1 week was pretty insane.
So Ruth is saying that she thinks that Ben had these qualities before, that they just... Well, sometimes you don't know what's in you until the moment. I mean, we hear that often. Yes. In fact, we had a couple Holocaust survivors that were neighbors, and others, they would say, some people kind of look at us like, we are, kind of aliens. How could we have survived? And we just did what we could, and we survived. We don't see ourselves as so other. And I'm sure you kind of feel that way. Well, you're Superman, so I'm not going to speak for you. May, yes. So May was diagnosed with breast cancer in 1970. Right. She said, I'm not going to let this disease... no one... Right. The rabbi said you're cured? Oh. Right. You're determined. However, I think it must be said, there are many people who fight cancer fiercely and take on this persona and are not going gently into that night, and they still, succumb. So no, I'm right. But not everybody who fights. Well, I just think that's important to share. Yeah. Well, I think Ben would say he's lucky that he was living near the National Institutes of Health, which had top flight treatment, and that didn't hurt. Yeah. Kathy, did you have a question? Oh, yes. Joanne?
Question is, how long after my first and second cancers did I? I'll focus on the second one. Did I have all my energy back and feel like myself again? Took longer after the second one because the second one really beat me up in ways I hadn't expected, and that, like we mentioned earlier, it was the one time I questioned whether I was superhuman. I would say 5 years. Not until I got my energy back. I mean, I got my energy and physical strength back within a couple years, and I got my endurance back. And that correlated with getting off steroids and getting off the immunosuppressant, things like that. But to just feel like myself, I think it took a very long time.
He still gets pretty pissed off, though, in traffic.
When the Redskins lose. Yeah, thank you. And I do try to maintain that perspective. Like I mentioned, it's easy for that to fade. And that's just human nature. It's part of being human. But I try to hold on to it as best I can. Yeah, sometimes it creates something I can write about in my blog. Like, you know, hey, let's laugh at these people who are freaking out about this one thing, and makes for good stories. I have cards up here, and I'm happy to distribute them. CancerSlayerBlog.com.
Yeah. You can go on and you read his blogs going all the way back to when his treatment. I mean, gives the history, and it's very readable, accessible. So I'd like to thank you for coming, and I want to thank, again, Ben. And he's got his books here.
Thank you all very much. This one, it published October 2014. This is my second book. It's a memoir about my cancer story, but it's for ages 10 and up, and it's really crisp reading. It's a nice, easy read, and this is $15. And I take a credit card and cash, and I also have these Cancer Slayer stickers.
Oh.
I can give those out for free. So if you want a Cancer Slayer sticker, and my card, which has all my websites and stuff. So I had one copy, but someone bought it earlier, and my publisher needs to do another print run.
I have a copy that I am willing to lend you for a fee.
You can get it online, and I can give you the website for that. Or you could get used copies on Amazon. Yeah, my parents were awesome. They're still awesome. My dad got really sick last January with pneumonia. He almost died, and I felt it was my obligation to make sure he didn't. So I lived with him in the ICU for 15 days, just sleeping on the cot. Thank you. I have an older brother. He got married last June. He lives about 3 miles from me.
Okay.
I graduated University of Virginia with a degree in economics, and now I'm in a master's program in creative writing for fiction at the University of Southern Maine.
Okay, I'm going to let him go and let you come and buy his book. Very good.
Yes, yes. As time